On today's mailbag show, I'm answering all of your burning questions about the offseason, heading into the season, and even next offseason looking ahead. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Paddock, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan since 2010, the founder and host for all 4 seasons of this Locked On Rangers podcast. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing and making your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Paddock. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment any single thing below. Before we get into today's show, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, today I'm answering all of your questions. There is one little bit of news that I wanted to note that happened over the weekend. Former Rangers manager Chris Woodward is back with the Dodgers organization. He is not going to be in a coaching role. He is going to be in a front office role, a special assistant, according to Jack Harris. Woodward was their third base coach back in the day. He is going to be kind of a roving instructional advisor, basically working throughout the org. So good for Chris Woodward landing back on his feet, landing with a good organization, and I'm sure he's happy to be back in baseball. Now, on to your questions. This first one comes to us from Joshua Klassen on YouTube. Next offseason, what superstar players do you think the Rangers will target, if any? Well, I have a list. I have a list of several. I think this next free agent class is going to be really interesting, and I think the Rangers could definitely get into the mix for it. I'm hoping they take a step forward this year, and that means that, instead of everyone next offseason being like, oh, the Rangers weren't any good, why'd they spend a whole bunch of money to bring in a bunch of players? It's, oh, the Rangers are pretty good, and they're spending a bunch of money to bring in these players. Obviously, the first of my list is Joey Gallo, former 2-time All-Star with the Rangers, is on a 1-year prove-it deal. I think is going to really excel with the Twins, and I think the Rangers should bring that young man home. I think they should have done it this offseason because they have a need in left field, and I think the $11 million I think that he's making this year would have been a perfect to slot into left field, have him come home, have him have a bounce back season, and then sign him to a long-term contract, which I would have loved them to do in the first place, but it's fine. It's fine. There are plenty of other guys that are really interesting. Obviously, Shohei Ohtani is at the top of the list. The Rangers are going to be as competitive as anybody trying to sign him. Obviously, nobody has as deep of pockets as the Mets and the Dodgers. The Dodgers are completely resetting their luxury tax, basically just didn't do anything this offseason so that they could reset that luxury tax so they could have more money to throw at Shohei Ohtani. Obviously, the Mets are going to be very in on him. The Angels just made the situation way more complicated, and Artie Moreno is no longer selling the team. He has decided he is going to stay with the franchise, one of the most meddlesome and just bad owners in the sport. Throws a lot of money, and that's a nice thing that owners do. But I did a whole episode, I think Friday, talking about how it takes more than just throwing a bunch of money, signing a bunch of big checks to be a good owner. Moreno is a guy who gets way too involved into his franchise and is wasting the prime of 2 of the greatest players the sport has ever seen. And hopefully one of them, in Shohei Ohtani, can be gone from the Angels next year, not just so that the Rangers don't have to see him that many times a year, but so that maybe the Rangers could go get him and see him more times a year, except he's on your team, which is much better. There's also Manny Machado, who has a player opt-out. I believe he has 5 years left on his deal, earning $30 million in each of those years. He could get a longer contract because he has been absolutely incredible the last couple of years. He's definitely a guy who the Rangers should keep an eye on. As much as I love Josh Young, Josh Young's ceiling is not Manny Machado. It's just not. There are a whole lot of players anywhere in the minors whose ceiling is that of Manny Machado. I think the Rangers will take a look at him. I think he ultimately signs back with San Diego, but someone they should keep an eye on, as well as Aaron Nola. Aaron Nola is going to be a free agent, and the Phillies, They have a big money pitcher in Zach Wheeler. They have 2 of the top 10 right-handed pitching prospects in all of baseball right now, including number 1. Those guys are very young. They should be coming up fairly soon. So if the Phillies think, if they kind of take a step back this year, which I think they might, I don't know if they're going to make it to the World Series again this year, but if they take a step back and they think, Noah's had some up and down seasons. Last year was really good for him, but I think the Rangers will definitely keep an eye on him. I also think he stays with the Phillies. Another few guys on this list, Yu Darvish is going to be a free agent. Lucas Giolito of the White Sox, I think he's definitely the most gettable of all these guys. Depends on what kind of a year he has. And Matt Chapman of the Blue Jays, I think people really sleep on how good that guy is. He's otherworldly defensively. Offensively, he's still fine, but he is just so incredibly good defensively at third base, and I think that would be a massive, massive upgrade for the Rangers infield, and I don't think he'd be too expensive, and get another veteran bat in there in your lineup to get some more depth. Maybe you have to move your infield around just a little bit defensively, but I think you add him in, and that's definitely worth it. So yeah, there's quite a few interesting guys on the free agent market next year. Next question comes to us from Harrison Alexander. He asks, what sort of production do you think the Rangers get out of a healthy Mitch Garver? How many games does he end up playing? Now, this is a huge question, and I think one that will definitely have a huge impact on the Rangers. I think people kind of sleep on how important Mitch Garver is to this team, how much he can provide. He was a Silver Slugger back in 2019, and for his career, he has an OPS over 813 in 363 games. But the question has always been his health. He's had 1 season where he's played over 100 games, only 2 years where he's played 90 or more. That 93-game season in 2019 had 31 home runs in 359 plate appearances. And I think that's kind of what the Rangers are hoping for. Over 80 games, between 80 and 100. He's not going to catch every single day. Jonah Heim and him, I think, are going to split fairly evenly the duties behind the dish. Heim is one of the best receivers in all of baseball. I'm going to be really interested to see, because neither of those guys have super great arms. I think the rule changes will definitely have an impact on them, because there's going to be a lot more stolen bases. But I do think that the Rangers are going to put him more as a DH just to try and keep him healthy. He had an injury before he even got to the Rangers, so a healthy season was kind of already out of the question. But if he can get 90 games in, I'm calling that a successful season. He showed what he can do when he is hot. He had that 1 week where he hit 4 home runs in that week when he was coming back. He was full-time DH. I believe that was split between a road series in Houston and in Anaheim, and he looked absolutely incredible, and that is a huge, huge weapon for the Rangers to have in their lineup. Just really hope that he stays healthy, and he could be a massive addition for this Rangers lineup, could take them from being an okay lineup to a really, really good lineup. So great question there. Coming up, we're going to get into more questions, including from some of my fellow hosts around the Locked On Network. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL playoffs are here, and we are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On, because they are the number 1 sportsbook in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers join today to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all of your favorite bets, from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine bets for a bigger payout chance with same game parlay, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now, the next question comes to us from Super Halo Bros, the Locked On Angels boys. He said, Angels fan here, other than Josh Young, which Ranger prospects are going to be a thorn in our side this season? Now, he was going to say for years to come, I would have just immediately let off with Evan Carter, but he's talking about this season, and that's a little bit trickier of a question. I mean, because there's not a whole lot of prospects that are really, really on the verge this season that are going to make a big, big impact this year. I think if you're looking for guys in my top 30, Yeri Rodriguez is probably the biggest guy in there. He is a right-handed reliever. If you're still counting Ezekiel Duran as a prospect, which he's not anymore, he has passed the threshold for minimum plate appearances. The same with Josh Smith. Both those guys passed that last year, so those guys aren't prospects. If we're looking at guys in the top 10, I mean, maybe Dustin Harris gets up this year. I don't see that happening. Maybe see a little bit of Justin Foscue. And things have to break really, really right for Owen White or Jack Leiter or Evan Carter to be up this year, but it's possible. And I don't see Luis Angel Acuna being a guy who plays every day with the Rangers. There's just not a spot for him. I think they're probably going to trade him to a team to get, well, I don't really know at this point because they have pitching depth. But I don't know. We'll see. If you're asking me for a guy who I feel pretty good about making a consistent impact this year at the big league level, I think that Yeri Rodriguez has to be my pick. Or Zach Kent. Let's just say Zach Kent, because I think he makes a big impact as well. I don't know about Thorn on the side. He's definitely going to have a couple of outings that are going to be really, really annoying for Angels fans. But Evan Carter is definitely one to keep an eye on because he is going to be a pain for years to come. Same with Josh Young. So I'm saying Josh Young because he's going to be the biggest pain for Angels fans for this year, as well as years to come. Next question comes to us from Landon McCool, host of Locked On Cowboys. He asks, when will the pain go away? Oof. Sorry about that Cowboys game, buddy. That was rough. And if you're talking about Rangers pain, well, I mean, it kind of depends. The pain is always there. It's part of sports. It's part of baseball. But if you're asking when the Rangers are going to be good again, at least fun, I think this year is a fair thing to think that they'll be, not miserable, not a laughing stock, not embarrassing, and kind of fun. So I'm hoping this year. As for playoff drought, also hoping this year. But next year really is when most of the pain will go away. There will always be some. I mean, the Rangers aren't going to win it all every year. But it will be less painful this year, Landon. Get well soon. Very sorry about your Cowboys loss. Next question comes to us from Jason Burke, host of Locked On A's. It's a great question. Bigger head, Bruce Bochy or Kevin Mensch. Both of these guys are famous for having very large heads, and I was able to actually look this up. And Bruce Bochy has an 8 1/8 inch hat, but it's Kevin Mensch with 8 1/4, a whole eighth of an inch of a head bigger. Bochy's head was so big that whenever he went to a new team, he would always take his old helmet with him and have it repainted because the other team wouldn't have a helmet big enough to fit his massive head, which is just very, very fun. Fun fact. Anyway, next question comes to us from Christian Klein. He asks, am I crazy to think Cavan Biggio from Toronto might be a good stopgap upgrade for left field until someone in the system is fully ready to take over the role? At that point, Biggio is a decent utility guy who could spot start for different guys around the diamond as needed. I know his production has been lowered a bit, but the change of scenery and being back home in Texas might boost him back to what his rookie season looked like. Now, that is something I had not considered, but looking at it, I think you might have a point there. I mean, he had a really, really fantastic rookie year, 100 games for him with Toronto, 16 home runs, 17 doubles, a 793 OPS in those 100 games. A really, really good on base, 364. The next year in the shortened season, played 59 of 60 games, had 8 home runs, 16 doubles, hit 250 on base, 375, and an 807 OPS. All while playing fairly decent defense. He played a lot of different positions. He played second. He played third base. He played outfield. He played all of the outfield positions. So mainly second, third. He also played some first base his rookie year. Played a little bit of first base this year. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, his advanced numbers weren't as great this year. His sprint speed is the top 20%, outs above average in the top 6%, arm strength bottom 20%. It's interesting and definitely a guy that I would want to take a look at. If you look at some of his extra numbers, or his advanced numbers from his rookie year, there were some not super great underlying stats, but some other things that kind of stood out. His barrel rate was in the top half of baseball. His walk percentage, the top 2% of baseball, and his chase rate, the 100th percentile, the best at not chasing out of the zone in all of baseball. His average exit velo and his expected slugging and batting average weren't super great. Struck out in the bottom 10 percentile of baseball that year, but I think there's something there. And I think as a stopgap, that would definitely be an interesting move to make. He is another left-handed hitter. He's played mostly second base for his career, but still I think would be decent in the outfield. Has that great on base. And it'd be something that I would be interested in taking a chance on. I think that the Rangers right now are going to go with one of Bubba Thompson or Josh Smith or Ezekiel Duran in left field. And I think eventually Aaron Zavala might take over there, or maybe Zavala ends up being the everyday DH. But I think that might be the move. Or maybe it's Evan Carter if Leody Taveras proves to be an above-average offensive center fielder. Then that would be the move there. But definitely a guy I think that would be worth taking a flyer on. He's going to be 28 this year. And, I don't know how much it would cost to go get him, but I don't know. I think it'd be worth a shot. You're definitely not crazy for thinking that. Coming up, we're going to take a look at more of these questions. But first, this word from our sponsors. Next question comes to us from Lindsey Crosby. He actually has two different questions. First question is, how has the co-pitching coaches thing worked? It's more common with hitting coaches than pitching coaches. Well, the Rangers had two pitching coaches last year, and they could have had 17, and I don't think that really would have made all that much of a difference on the staff. I don't think they did a bad job, but it was just a matter of there wasn't a lot of talent to work with. It's been the case for the Rangers pitching staff the last few years. They've had a couple of talented starters that usually end up getting traded either at midseason or just leaving. Actually, really, just been being traded as of late, but there just wasn't a whole lot of talent to work with. I like bringing in Mike Maddox, having one guy, but I don't know if you can necessarily call the co-pitching coaches thing a failure or a success because I just don't think they had the personnel. It's the same thing with most of the coaching staff that was let go last year, Chris Woodward included. I don't think they had enough good personnel to be fairly judged whether the experiment was working or not. His next question is, how do you feel about the defense behind these new pitchers? Seager has had his struggles last year, and the outfield is still a work in progress. Well, offensively, I think you're right about the outfield being a work in progress. For the most part, Leody, we don't really know how he's going to do offensively. He had a real up and down year last year, but defensively, there's absolutely no question about him. He is one of the best defensive center fielders in all of baseball, has one of the strongest arms in baseball, incredibly fast, makes incredible reads, plays balls well, had some mental lapses last year that were kind of uncharacteristic, which was the biggest question with him. Like last year, I think more than the offense, for me, it was something that concerned me the most. And it's not something that has been characteristic of him in his past. He has always been an elite defensive center fielder. I think in right field, Adolis Garcia is way up there. I mean, we know how incredibly strong his arm is, but Leody's was somehow even stronger this year. And Bubba Thompson, yeah, he's made some questionable reads, but his speed lets him make up for those things. His arm isn't super great, but if you're putting him in left field, I mean, the range alone that you have with a big outfield park that the Rangers have, I feel really good about it. I think Seager's defense at shortstop, it's going to be down a little bit this year because his range isn't super elite. He's been able to make up for a lack of range with great defensive planning, shifting, all that good stuff the Rangers have and that the Dodgers had with him. I think his defense is fine, though. I mean, obviously, you're not paying him for his glove. I think Semien would probably be a better defensive shortstop, but you're paying him $325 million to be your shortstop. Seager, that is. He's going to be the shortstop, at least for this year. I think he'll be fine. I mean, the corner infield defense, after so many years of being spoiled with Adrian Beltre and Mitch Moreland, it's not that anymore. I think Young will be fine. And I think Lowe will be better than he was last year. It's hard to be worse. He knows that he was bad at it, and I think he's gotten a little bit better. just kind of keeping that, decent. So I don't know. I'm interested to see how it'll play. Obviously, Marcus Semien is fantastic defensively. I think Seager's fine. Young will be fine, and Lowe will hit enough to where I'll be less mad about it than I was last year, I'm hoping. Next question comes to us from my boy, Matt. Can deGrom play quarterback? Well, no, I don't think he can. And I want to keep that man safe. I don't want to put him playing football. I think maybe eventually, maybe if he'd like grown up doing football, but he's been so skinny that I don't think that football ever would have been the move for him. He is the thin king, 6'5". He's tall enough. He's got a big arm, so maybe he could throw the football well. I don't know how well he runs. You don't ever really see him run. Maybe you saw him run the bases a little bit when he was hitting as a pitcher and doing that at an okay level for a pitcher in the NL, but that's not a thing anymore. So unfortunately, no, deGrom cannot play quarterback. Next question comes for us from H-Town Wheelhouse, one of the hosts of Locked On Astros. He says, who is the leader on this team? So many new names the last 2-3 seasons. Who would you say is or needs to become the clubhouse leader? Well, I think it's Marcus Semien. I mean, none of these guys in the clubhouse are very vocal leaders, Semien included. Semien and Seager they were never like the rah-rah guy of whatever team they were on. They're more of a lead by example type of group. But in an article Evan Grant wrote for the Dallas Morning News last week, he talked about Seager being a little bit more vocal. Seager and Nathaniel Lowe being a little bit more vocal in holding guys accountable to their off-season workouts. And I think that is kind of going to be the move. I think Seager he's not as old as Semien. They've both been around for a long time in the big leagues, but I think that Semien is going to step into that role, and I think eventually Josh Young is going to step into that role. He is more of a vocal kind of leader, more active, a little bit more extroverted than those other guys, and I think that eventually he'll step into that role. But he is still going to be a rookie this year, so I don't think that he is going to be the one to step up there. I mean, all the Rangers guys that they've brought in, deGrom included, they are all more lead by example. Eventually, every once in a while, you need a guy to step up and be the vocal leader of that team. I think having Bochy in there is going to help with that. But yeah, if you're going to ask me for who the clubhouse leader is going to be, I'd say Marcus Semien at this point. Next question comes to us from Ryan Clary, host of Locked On Nats. Who will benefit most from the shift ban? I think there's an obvious answer here, and that it's Corey Seager. There was a whole article on MLB.com about why Corey Seager will be one of the guys who, or if not the guy who benefits the most in all of Major League Baseball from the shift being banned. He had the most hits stolen from him from the shift last year. But I think Marcus Semien is a low-key candidate that is going to benefit quite a bit in terms of right-handed hitters. He was shifted against very, very heavily and had a whole lot of hits stolen from him. One of the guys who had more hits stolen from as a right-handed hitter with the shift. And I think it's also going to benefit him defensively, showing a little bit more of his range. We'll see how all of these new rules actually affect the range of guys in middle infield defense, but I think it's going to really, really benefit Marcus Semien this year. I think he's going to have an even better year than last year, and without a horrible, terrible, horrendous start to the season like he did. But yeah, I think that the Rangers are going to have a lot of guys who benefit from him from this. I think that the two in the middle infield are going to be the ones who benefit the most. I don't think Lowe is going to benefit all that much. I still think he's going to have a great offensive season, but he was a guy who sprayed around to all fields and did not hit into the shift and was not shifted against all that much because he was able to go the other way very often, and that's just the type of hitter that he was. But yeah, I also think Joey Gallo is going to benefit a lot. There's a lot of obvious candidates, and unfortunately, I think that Kyle Tucker of the Astros is also going to benefit quite a bit from the shift being gone. And that might be a huge pain for the Rangers to have to deal with because he is also a very, very good hitter. Last question comes to us from Sochan the GOAT. He asks, are the Rangers still pursuing Brian Reynolds? I'm assuming here there's not like Mark Reynolds or something. Hence the hesitation of signing Profar. I think they're still in talks, but all the things that I have read and seen and kind of inferred about the Pirates is that they're asking for a lot. They're asking for a whole lot in terms of what they're going to get in a prospect haul. I've seen it that they were going to ask for Owen White, Jack Leiter, and Evan Carter, which I might part with one of those three for Brian Reynolds, but I don't know that I would not part with all three. I don't even think I could part with two of them for Brian Reynolds. It's just a question. He is such a hard guy to evaluate, and they're in such a weird spot. They have so much payroll flexibility. If the owner would ever spend money in his entire freaking life, I think they're going to try and be about where the Rangers are this year. A young, scrappy team, except they'll have more young guys in their lineup and, not really many, if any, none, no free agent, no big name free agents. They did bring in Andrew McCutchen to come back home. That's going to be a great feel-good story, and I think something that will also benefit them pretty well. But I don't imagine they're going to just straight up sell. I mean, if they're going to sell on Brian Reynolds, I think right now you got to sell before the season. I mean, you've set your ridiculous price. Nobody's going to pay it. Just go find the best package that you can get. If you're not going to extend Reynolds, I think they should just extend Reynolds because you have all this money. I mean, just extend Reynolds. Do something for your fans besides just bringing back Andrew McCutchen. But I think that's why Profar has not signed. There have been more and more outfielders that are signing, and it seems like Profar and David Peralta are pretty much the only real everyday left fielders that are still out there on the market. I mean, unless you thought that Cole Calhoun's last season was a fluke, or if you're really in on Robbie Grossman, there's fewer and fewer guys every day. I mean, Adam Duvall just signed with the Boston Red Sox, so there's fewer and fewer outfield options every day. I think Profar is waiting for a big payday. Someone will give it to him. I don't know who. Someone needs to. Honestly, the Marlins might need to think about that. But they're doing some weird stuff as well, as we saw with their trade for Luis Arias, giving up Pablo Lopez. I'm probably going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the week if the Rangers should have gotten in on that, but not enough time in this in this remaining episode. So to answer that question, are the Rangers still pursuing Reynolds? I think lightly, but I just think I don't know that is necessarily what's holding them up from signing Jurickson and Profar. I think Profar is going to get a 3-year deal, and whoever the Rangers sign in left field, if they do sign anybody, I think it'd probably just be a maybe 1+1 deal at this point. Because I kind of like who the Rangers could stick in left field for the next couple of seasons, prospect-wise. But that's going to do it for this show. Thank you all so much for asking all your questions. We'll be doing another one next week. Hopefully it'll be on Monday. We'll see. It might end up being Tuesday. It might be a Tuesday mailbag kind of thing. But thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia. He's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.